I stood on the porch of what used to be my family's house, holding a bottle of vintage wine and wearing my finest pearls, the ones my late husband had given me for our 30th anniversary. The November air was crisp, and I could smell the turkey roasting inside, hear the familiar sounds of laughter and conversation that once welcomed me. Samuel answered the door, and the warmth drained from his face the moment he saw me. "Mom," he said, not moving aside to let me in. "What are you doing here?" The question hit me like a slap. For 63 years, I had commanded respect wherever I went. My silver hair was perfectly styled, my makeup flawless despite my age, and I carried myself with the dignity of a woman who had never bowed to anyone. Yet here I was, being questioned at my own son's door like an unwelcome stranger. "It's Thanksgiving," I said simply, extending the wine toward him. "I brought your father's favorite bottle." Samuel's wife, Monica, appeared behind him, her face flushed with embarrassment. Behind her, I could see the dining room table, the same table where I had hosted Thanksgiving for 35 years before my husband passed. The same table where I had taught Samuel to carve turkey, where I had listened to his dreams and ambitions. But today, there was no place set for me. "Mom, we need to talk," Samuel said, stepping onto the porch and closing the door behind him. The message was clear. I wasn't welcome inside. "I only invited my mother-in-law this year," he continued, not meeting my eyes. "Dorothy is the special one now. She's more helpful with the kids, and Monica really needs her support." The words hung in the cold air between us like a death sentence. 42 years I had been his mother. 42 years of sacrifice, love, and devotion. And now I was being replaced by a woman who had entered our family 5 years ago. "The special one," I repeated, tasting the bitterness of those words. Through the window, I could see Dorothy holding my youngest grandchild, receiving the adoration that once belonged to me. She was laughing at something Samuel had said, playing the role of beloved matriarch while I stood outside in the cold like a beggar. "It's just better this way," Samuel said, his voice lacking conviction. "Dorothy doesn't bring any tension. She just makes everyone happy." Tension. As if my very presence was a burden to bear. I looked at my son, really looked at him, and saw a man I no longer recognized. The boy I had raised to be strong had become weak, choosing the easy path over loyalty. The man I had been so proud of had become a coward who would cast aside his own mother for temporary peace. "I understand," I said quietly, placing the wine bottle on the porch rail. "I wouldn't want to bring tension to your perfect family dinner." Samuel's relief was visible, and somehow that made everything worse. He actually thought this conversation was over, that I would simply disappear into the background of his life like a discarded photograph. "Thanks, Mom. I knew you'd understand. Maybe we can do something next week, just the two of us." I smiled then, not the warm smile of a loving mother, but something colder, more calculating. "Of course, dear. Next week." As I walked back to my car, I could hear the sounds of celebration continuing inside. My grandchildren's voices mixed with Dorothy's laughter, and I realized that in their minds, I had already been erased. The matriarch was dead. Long live the matriarch. That night, I sat in my empty house, the house my husband had built for our family, the house where Samuel had taken his first steps and spoken his first words. I poured myself a glass of wine and thought about respect, about loyalty, about the price of taking someone's love for granted. My husband had been many things, distant, demanding, sometimes cruel, but he had been wise in one crucial way. Before he died, he had pulled me aside and pressed a sealed envelope into my hands. "Eleanor Grace Whitfield never begged for anything in her life," he had said, using my maiden name instead of his own. "Don't start now." Inside that envelope were documents that would change everything, documents that Samuel knew nothing about. My husband had suspected this day would come, had seen the weakness in our son that I had been too blind to notice. As I sat there alone, watching the clock tick past midnight into a new day, I felt something shift inside me. The hurt was still there, raw and bleeding, but it was being consumed by something else, something harder and infinitely more dangerous. I picked up my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found the number I was looking for. James Mitchell, my husband's attorney, answered on the second ring despite the late hour. "Leah?" His voice was concerned. "Is everything all right?" "James," I said, my voice steady despite the storm raging in my chest. "I need you to activate the contingency plans we discussed. All of them." There was a pause. "Are you certain? Once we start this process, there's no going back." I thought about Samuel's face when he told me I wasn't welcome. I thought about Dorothy's laughter echoing through what used to be my domain. I thought about my grandchildren who would grow up never knowing the woman who had helped shape their father. "I've never been more certain of anything in my life," I said. "My son wants me out of his life. He's about to learn what that actually means." If you've ever been told you're too old to start over, let me tell you, that's a lie. Your story isn't over, and you still have chapters left to write. Our best-selling book, Reclaiming Your Peace After Pain, is filled with simple, powerful steps to help you heal, rebuild, and fall in love with life again. Click the link in the description box and start your new beginning today. The morning after Thanksgiving, I woke with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. As I prepared my coffee in the silence of my kitchen, I found myself thinking about my late husband, Richard, and the conversation that had changed everything. It was 3 months before he died, when the cancer had finally beaten down his pride enough for him to speak honestly. We were sitting in his study, the same room where he had built his steel empire, where he had made the decisions that shaped our family's fortune. "Leah," he had said, his voice already thin but still carrying that authoritative tone that had commanded boardrooms for decades. "I need to tell you something about Samuel." I had been arranging his medications, trying to maintain the normalcy we both desperately needed. "What about him?"
"He's weak."
The words were delivered without emotion, as if he were discussing the weather. "Not stupid, but weak. And weak men make dangerous decisions when they inherit power." I had wanted to defend our son, to remind Richard of Samuel's achievements, his charm, his intelligence. But something in my husband's eyes stopped me. "I've changed the will," Richard continued. "The lawyers have the new documents. Everything, the house, the business interests, the investments, it all goes through you first. Samuel won't see a penny until you decide he's ready. Richard, he's our son. He's a spoiled boy in a man's body." Richard cut me off. "And spoiled boys don't respect what they don't earn. If he proves himself worthy, you can release his inheritance. If he doesn't." He shrugged, the gesture speaking volumes. At the time, I had thought it was just the paranoia of a dying man. Richard had always been controlling, had always believed that love without conditions was weakness. But as I sat in my kitchen that morning, remembering how casually Samuel had dismissed me, I began to understand my husband's foresight. The phone rang at exactly 9 o'clock. I knew it would be Samuel before I answered. "Mom,"
His voice was tight with panic.
"there's been some kind of mistake with the bank. They're saying my accounts are frozen, that there's some issue with Dad's estate. But that's impossible, right? I mean, Dad died 2 years ago. Everything was settled." I took a sip of my coffee, savoring both the warmth and the desperation in my son's voice. "What kind of issue, dear?" "They won't tell me. They just keep saying I need to speak with Dad's attorneys, but when I called them, they said they could only discuss the matter with you." "Mom, what's going on?" The beautiful thing about respect is that you don't truly appreciate it until it's gone. For 2 years, Samuel had lived as if his inheritance was his birthright, making financial decisions based on money he assumed would always be there. He had bought the bigger house, taken the expensive vacations, made investments with the confidence of a man who believed his safety net was infinite. Well, sweetheart, I said, my voice honey-sweet, perhaps you should have included me in more family decisions if you wanted me included in family business. There was silence on the other end of a line. I could almost hear the gears turning in his head as he tried to process what I was saying. Mom, this isn't a joke. My mortgage payment is due next week, and I've got 3 major deals that depend on my credit rating. If there's some kind of hold on these state funds. There's no hold, Samuel. There's a decision. My decision. Another pause, longer this time. When he spoke again, his voice had changed, taking on the wheedling tone he'd used as a child when he wanted something. Mom, I know I handled things poorly, but you can't seriously be taking this out on my finances. This affects Monica and the kids too. Does it? I asked, examining my perfectly manicured nails. How interesting. I wasn't important enough to consider when you were making decisions about family gatherings, but now suddenly I'm crucial to your financial security. That's not. Look, we can talk about Thanksgiving later. Right now I need you to call the bank and clear this up. The entitlement in his voice was breathtaking. Even now, even as his world began to crumble, he still believed he could command me like a servant. No, I said simply.
What?
I said no, Samuel. I will not be calling the bank. I will not be clearing anything up. And I will not be fixing the mess you've made of your priorities. I heard him take a sharp breath. You're serious? You're actually going to destroy my life because I didn't invite you to dinner. Oh, my dear boy, I said, setting down my coffee cup. I'm not destroying your life. I'm simply no longer protecting you from the consequences of your choices. There's a difference. The line went quiet except for the sound of his labored breathing. Finally, he spoke, and his voice was small and desperate. What do you want? It was the right question, but about 2 years too late. I want you to learn what respect actually costs, I said. I want you to understand that love isn't unconditional when you make it conditional first. Mom, please. I'm not your safety net anymore, Samuel. I'm not your backup plan. I'm not the woman you turn to when everyone else fails you. I'm the woman you told wasn't welcome at your table. So find someone else to solve your problems. I hung up before he could respond. Within the hour, James Mitchell called to confirm that all the legal mechanisms were in place. Samuel's trust fund was frozen. His business credit lines, which had been guaranteed by estate assets, were being called in. The carefully constructed financial empire he thought was his was revealing itself to be built on sand. I spent the rest of the day in my garden, tending to my roses. There's something therapeutic about pruning, cutting away the dead wood so the healthy parts can flourish. Some people might call it cruel, but I call it necessary. My husband had been right about Samuel's weakness, but he had been wrong about one thing. He thought I might be too soft to do what needed to be done. He never understood that a woman doesn't reach 63 years of age, doesn't survive 40 years of marriage to a steel magnate, without developing her own kind of strength. The boy who had once promised to take care of me in my old age was about to learn what it meant to take care of himself. That evening, as I sat with a glass of wine and watched the sunset through my living room windows, I found myself thinking about the Samuel I had raised, or thought I had raised. He had been such a beautiful baby, with his father's strong jaw and my green eyes. Strangers would stop us on the street to comment on how handsome he was, and I had basked in their admiration. My golden boy, I used to call him. My perfect son. The signs of what he would become were there early, but I had been too blinded by love to see them. When he was 8, he had thrown a tantrum because I wouldn't buy him the expensive toy he wanted, screaming in the middle of the store that I was the meanest mommy ever. Other mothers had looked at me with sympathy, but even then, I should have recognized the manipulation in his tears. By high school, Samuel had learned to use his charm like a weapon. Teachers adored him. Girls followed him around like lost puppies, and even his father, usually so critical, would beam with pride when Samuel brought home another achievement award. But at home, when the audience disappeared, he was different with me. "Mom, you're embarrassing me," he would say when I tried to hug him in front of his friends. "Can't you just be normal?" Normal, to Samuel, meant invisible. It meant being there when he needed something, but disappearing when he didn't. It meant being grateful for his occasional affection instead of expecting it as my right. When he brought Monica home for the first time, I had hoped she might soften him, might bring out the gentleness I remembered from his childhood. Instead, she enabled his worst instincts. Monica was sweet but weak, the kind of woman who saw conflict as something to be avoided rather than resolved. When Samuel would dismiss my opinions or cut me off mid-sentence during family dinners, Monica would just smile nervously and change the subject. The real betrayal had come 5 years ago, when Monica's mother Dorothy moved to town. Dorothy was everything I wasn't: agreeable, unchallenging, content to play the role of doting grandmother without any expectations of her own. She would babysit at a moment's notice, never questioned Samuel's decisions, and treated him like the brilliant, successful man he believed himself to be. Within months, Dorothy had replaced me in every meaningful way. She attended the children's school events, helped with birthday party planning, and somehow became the go-to person for family emergencies. I watched it happen with a growing sense of bewilderment, wondering how I had gone from indispensable to optional in my own son's life. The worst part was how natural it seemed to everyone else. Monica would call Dorothy first when she needed help, and Samuel would turn to Dorothy for advice about everything from investments to vacation planning. I became the afterthought, the obligation, the person they remembered to include only when someone else pointed out my absence. "Dorothy just gets it," Samuel had said once when I questioned why his mother-in-law was more involved in financial decisions than I was. "She doesn't make everything complicated." Complicated. That's what I had become in his eyes, a complication to be managed rather than a mother to be honored. My phone buzzed with a text message from Samuel. "Mom, I'm coming over. We need to talk." I smiled and typed back, "I'll be here." 30 minutes later, I heard his car in my driveway. Through the window, I watched him sit for a moment before getting out, probably rehearsing whatever speech he thought would fix this situation. He still looked handsome. Success and privilege had aged him well, but there was a tension in his shoulders that hadn't been there yesterday. When he knocked, I took my time answering. Let him wait. Let him stand on my porch the way he had made me stand on his. "Mom." He stepped inside without being invited, immediately taking charge of the space, as he always did. "We need to get this sorted out. Would you like some coffee?" I asked pleasantly, as if he were any other guest. "No, I don't want coffee. I want to understand what's happening with Dad's estate and why you're suddenly acting like this." I settled into my favorite armchair, the one Richard used to joke was my throne, and studied my son's face. Even in crisis, he expected immediate solutions, expected others to accommodate his needs. "I'm acting exactly like I've always acted, Samuel. The only difference is that now you need something from me, so you're finally paying attention." "That's not fair, isn't it?" I leaned forward slightly, my voice remaining calm. "When was the last time you called me just to see how I was doing? When was the last time you asked about my health, my friends, my interests? When was the last time you treated me like a person instead of a problem to be solved?" He ran his hands through his hair, a gesture I remembered from his childhood. "Look, I know I've been busy, but that doesn't mean you can just cut off my inheritance. That money belongs to me." "No," I said quietly. "It belongs to me. Your father made very sure of that." For the first time since entering my house, Samuel looked uncertain. "What are you talking about?" "Your father knew exactly what kind of man you were becoming, even if I was too blind to see it." He structured his will to ensure that I would control the estate until I deemed you worthy of inheriting it. Samuel stared at me as if I had spoken in a foreign language. You're lying. Dad wouldn't have done that. He trusted me with the business. He groomed me to take over. He groomed you to be competent, not to be respectful. There's a difference. I stood and walked to the window, looking out at the garden where I had played with Samuel as a child. Your father spent his last months watching you, Samuel. Watching how you treated your family, how you prioritized your wife's mother over your own, how you took my sacrifices for granted. So this is about Dorothy? His voice rose with frustration. You're destroying my life because you're jealous of Monica's mother? I turned to face him, and for the first time in our conversation, I let him see the full weight of my disappointment. I'm not jealous of Dorothy, Samuel. I'm disappointed in the man who chose her approval over his mother's dignity. The silence stretched between us like a chasm. Finally, Samuel's shoulders sagged, and I saw a flicker of the boy I used to know. What do you want me to do? He asked, his voice smaller now. But it was too late for that question. The golden boy I had raised was gone, replaced by a man who viewed relationships as transactions and love as something to be rationed based on convenience. I want you to leave, I said. And I want you to think very carefully about what kind of man you've become. After he left, I poured myself another glass of wine and considered the irony of the situation. My son had spent years teaching me that I was disposable. Now he was about to learn the same lesson. I was in my rose garden the next morning when my phone rang. The caller ID showed Samuel's number, but when I answered, it was Monica's voice that greeted me, high-pitched with barely controlled hysteria. Leah, thank God. I've been trying to reach you all morning. Something terrible is happening. I straightened up from my roses, pulling off my gardening gloves with deliberate slowness.
Good morning, Monica.
How are you, dear? How am I? Her voice cracked.
I'm terrified.
The bank called Samuel this morning. They're saying our mortgage is in default, that the automatic payments from the estate account have been stopped. But that's impossible, right? That money has been coming automatically for 2 years. Has it? I asked mildly, examining a particularly beautiful bloom. How interesting. Leah, please. I know you and Samuel had some kind of argument, but this affects the children too. They're talking about foreclosure proceedings. They're saying we have 30 days to bring the account current, or they'll start the process to take our house. The desperation in her voice might have moved me once. Before yesterday, before I learned that family loyalty was apparently a one-way street, I might have felt sympathy for the woman my son had chosen over me. Well, I said, settling onto my garden bench, I suppose Samuel will need to figure out how to make those payments himself. But he can't. His business accounts are frozen too. Some kind of issue with credit guarantees that were tied to your husband's estate. Leah, I don't understand any of this financial stuff, but our accountant says it's serious. Really serious. I could hear voices in the background, Samuel shouting at someone on another phone, children asking questions that couldn't be answered. The perfect life they had built on my husband's money was crumbling, and they were finally learning what the rest of the world already knew. Nothing lasts forever, without effort. Where's Dorothy? I asked. Surely this special one can help with this situation. Monica was quiet for a moment. She doesn't have that kind of money. Leah, please. I'm begging you. Whatever Samuel did, whatever he said, I'm sorry. We're all sorry. Just tell us what we need to do to fix this. The word, begging, hung in the air between us. Monica, who had stood by silently while her husband dismissed me, was now begging for my help. Dorothy, the woman who had been elevated above me, was apparently not so special when real problems arose. Monica, I said, my voice gentle but firm, I want you to understand something. This isn't punishment. This is education. For 2 years, Your family has lived as if I didn't exist except when you needed something. You included Dorothy in every decision, every celebration, every meaningful moment, while I was relegated to the role of occasional visitor in my own son's life. That's not. We never meant. Intentions are meaningless now, I interrupted. Actions are what matter. And your actions have taught me that I'm not family. I'm a convenience. So, I'm removing the convenience. I could hear her crying now, soft sobs that she was trying to muffle. What can we do? How can we fix this? You can't fix this, Monica. That's the point. Some lessons can only be learned through experience. I hung up and immediately turned off my phone. I had no interest in the desperate calls that were sure to follow, no desire to hear Samuel's voice get progressively more frantic as the reality of his situation sank in. By the time I turned my phone back on that evening, I had 17 missed calls and 12 voicemails. I deleted them without listening. Instead, I called James Mitchell. Leah, he said, his voice carefully neutral. I've been expecting your call. Samuel's been trying to reach me all day. And I told him exactly what the legal documents say. That all estate disbursements are at your sole discretion until such time as you transfer control to him or until your death. How did he take that news? James was quiet for a moment. He accused me of lying. He demanded to see the original will, the one he thought his father had signed. When I showed him the documents, let's just say he wasn't prepared for the reality of his situation. I could imagine Samuel's face when he realized the truth, that his inheritance had never been guaranteed, that every dollar he had spent over the past 2 years had been at my sufferance. The golden boy discovering that his crown was made of tin. What happens now? I asked. Now he learns to live within his actual means instead of his assumed means. His business will need to be restructured without the estate guarantees. His lifestyle will need to be significantly reduced. And his relationship with you will need to be rebuilt from the ground up, if that's something you're interested in. I thought about that last part. Was I interested in rebuilding our relationship? Could a mother simply stop loving her son because he had disappointed her? The answer came to me with surprising clarity. Love wasn't the issue. I would always love Samuel, the way a mother loves the child who once existed. But respect, trust, and priority, those things had to be earned. And Samuel had spent years proving he didn't believe I was worth the effort. James, I said, I want you to prepare additional documentation. I'm going to be making some changes to my own will. What kind of changes? I smiled, though he couldn't see it. The kind that ensures this lesson is permanent. The next morning, Samuel appeared at my door before 7 a.m. He looked like he hadn't slept, his usually perfect hair disheveled and his expensive suit wrinkled. The golden boy was tarnishing. Mom, he said, and for the first time in years, he sounded like the child he used to be.
Please.
We need to talk. I looked at him through the door for a long moment before opening it. He was my son, after all. But he was also the man who had told me I wasn't welcome at his table. Yes, I said finally.
I suppose vedo.
Samuel sat in my living room like a man attending his own funeral, which in many ways he was. The life he had built on assumptions and entitlement was dying, and he was finally being forced to watch. I don't understand how this happened, he said for the third time, running his hands through his hair. Dad always told me the business would be mine. He trained me, he brought me into the company, he talked about legacy and family responsibility. Your father trained you to run a business, I corrected, pouring myself coffee but not offering him any. He never said he trusted you to inherit it. The distinction seemed to physically pain him, but the will he showed me was a draft, Samuel, one of several versions he considered before making his final decision. I watched the implications of this sink in. Everything Samuel thought he knew about his future, every plan he had made, Every dollar he had spent in anticipation of his inheritance, all of it had been built on a foundation of sand. What did I do wrong? The question came out as a whisper. It was such a simple question with such a complicated answer. Where did I begin? With the birthdays he forgot? The holidays where Dorothy took precedence? The way he would interrupt me in conversations, dismiss my opinions, treat me like an aging relative to be tolerated rather than a mother to be respected? You chose comfort over character, I said finally. You chose Dorothy's easy approval over your mother's honest love. You chose to see me as a burden rather than a blessing. Samuel looked up at me with something that might have been genuine confusion. But Dorothy never caused problems. She never questioned my decisions or made family gatherings tense. No, I agreed.
She didn't.
And now you're going to learn the difference between someone who challenges you because they love you and someone who enables you because they need something from you. As if summoned by our conversation, Samuel's phone buzzed with a text message. He glanced at it and his face went pale. Monica wants to know if Dorothy can help with the mortgage payment, he said quietly. I felt a cold smile touch my lips. And what did you tell her? I don't know what to tell her. Dorothy's retirement savings aren't enough to cover our expenses. She was helping with groceries and babysitting, but she can't save our house. The mighty Dorothy, revealed to be just an ordinary woman with ordinary resources. The special one who couldn't actually solve the problems that mattered. My phone rang, interrupting the moment. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, but I answered anyway. Mrs. Whitfield? The voice was unfamiliar, professional. This is Detective Martinez with the Financial Crimes Unit. We're calling about a complaint that's been filed regarding estate fraud and elder abuse. Samuel's eyes went wide. What? He whispered. I held up a hand to quiet him. I'm sorry, Detective, but I think there's been some misunderstanding. What complaint? A Samuel Whitfield filed a report claiming that someone has illegally frozen his inheritance accounts and is using threats to extort compliance from family members. He's alleging that you're manipulating estate documents to gain financial control. The audacity of it took my breath away. My own son had called the police on me, had accused me of crimes because I wouldn't continue funding his lifestyle. I see, I said calmly, though my hands were shaking with rage. Detective, I'd be happy to provide you with all the legal documentation regarding my late husband's estate. Perhaps you'd like to speak with our family attorney as well? Samuel was frantically shaking his head, mouthing no, 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 as he realized what he had done. That would be helpful, ma'am. We'll need to verify the legitimacy of all estate documents and ensure that no coercion is involved in any financial decisions. After I hung up, the silence in my living room was deafening. Samuel looked at me with something approaching terror. Mom, I can explain. You called the police. My voice was deadly quiet. You accused your own mother of committing crimes because I won't give you money you never earned. I was desperate. Monica was crying, the kids were asking questions, and Dorothy said maybe someone was taking advantage of you. Maybe you weren't thinking clearly.
Dorothy said.
I repeated the words like they were poison. So Dorothy is now making decisions about my mental competence. Samuel realized he had made another mistake. She was just trying to help.
No.
I stood up, my full height and dignity on display. She was trying to protect the gravy train that your family has become for her. And you, my darling son, just gave me the perfect opportunity to show both of you exactly what real consequences look like. I walked to my desk and pulled out a folder I had been saving for just such an occasion. Inside were the results of a private investigation I had commissioned 3 months ago, when I first began to suspect that Dorothy's influence on my family was more calculated than coincidental. Did you know, I said, handing Samuel the first page, that your precious Dorothy has been bankrupt twice in the past 10 years? that she lost her house to foreclosure and has been living off the generosity of others ever since. Samuel's face went white as he read. This can't be right. Oh, but it gets better. I handed him another page. She also has outstanding debts in 3 states, including unpaid taxes that the IRS has been trying to collect for 5 years. The reason she moved here wasn't to be closer to her daughter. It was to escape creditors. The paper slipped from Samuel's hands as the full picture became clear. Dorothy hadn't been helping his family out of love. She had been using them as a meal ticket, a comfortable place to land while she hid from her financial responsibilities. But she babysits, she cooks, she helps with the kids. She provides services in exchange for room, board, and spending money, I corrected. It's called earning her keep, not being generous. Samuel's phone rang. Monica's ringtone. He stared at it like it might bite him. Answer it, I said. Let's see how special Dorothy seems when your wife finds out the truth about her mother. He answered with a shaking hand. Monica? Even from across the room, I could hear her voice, high and frantic. Samuel, there are men at our door. They say they're from some collection agency, and they're looking for my mother. They have papers that say she owes $30,000 in back taxes, and they think she might be here. Samuel looked at me with growing horror as the pieces fell into place. The helpful mother-in-law, the woman who had replaced me in his affections, was a financial fugitive who had brought her problems to his doorstep. Tell Monica to check her jewelry box, I suggested quietly, and her purse, and anywhere else she might have left cash or valuables lying around. Samuel's face went ashen. Monica, he said into the phone, we need to talk. Right now. The golden boy was learning that not all that glitters is gold, and sometimes the people who seem most helpful are the ones with the most to gain. By the time the detective arrived to review the estate documents, Samuel had a much clearer understanding of just how badly he had misjudged everyone in his life, especially me. Detective Martinez was a professional woman in her 40s with intelligent eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. She sat in my living room reviewing the estate documents with the same careful attention she probably gave murder cases. Everything appears to be in order, Mrs. Whitfield, she said finally, closing the file. Your husband's will is properly executed, witnessed, and filed. The financial arrangements are complex but completely legal. Samuel sat across from us looking like a man who had been struck by lightning. The reality of his situation was finally penetrating the fog of entitlement that had clouded his judgment for so long. But the complaint, he started, will be dismissed, Detective Martinez said firmly. Mr. Whitfield, filing false reports is a serious offense. Your mother has every legal right to control the estate assets according to your father's wishes. Accusing her of elder abuse or fraud could have resulted in charges against you. After the detective left, Samuel and I sat in silence for nearly 10 minutes. I could see him processing everything. The inheritance he didn't actually have, the mother-in-law who wasn't what she seemed, the wife who was probably discovering missing jewelry at that very moment. I need to go home, he said finally. Yes, I agreed. I think you do. But home, as Samuel was about to discover, was no longer the sanctuary he had imagined it to be. I didn't hear from him for 3 days. During that time, I kept myself busy with my own affairs. I had lunch with my book club, tended my garden, and made some very strategic phone calls. You see, when you've been married to a successful businessman for 40 years, you learn things. You learn who the important people are, who holds influence, and how reputations are built and destroyed. Richard had taught me well, even if he never intended those lessons to be used against his own son. On the 4th day, Samuel appeared at my door again. This time, he wasn't alone. Monica stood beside him, her eyes red from crying, and conspicuously absent was Dorothy. Mom, Samuel said, his voice hoarse. We need to talk about Dorothy. I invited them in. noting how Monica couldn't meet my eyes. The proud young woman who had once dismissed my opinions was now standing in my living room, looking defeated. "She's gone," Monica said quietly. "She packed up her things yesterday morning and left. She took some of my grandmother's jewelry and about $300 in cash from my emergency fund." "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, though we all knew I wasn't. "The debt collectors won't stop calling," Samuel continued. "Apparently she's been using our address for her mail, telling creditors she lives here. They want to garnish our wages to pay for her debts." "That must be very stressful," I observed, settling into my chair. Monica finally looked at me, and I saw something I had never seen in her eyes before, respect mixed with fear. "Leah, I owe you an apology. We all do. I should have seen what she was doing, should have questioned why she was so eager to help all the time." "People see what they want to see, dear," I said gently. "You wanted to see a loving mother-in-law. Samuel wanted to see someone who made his life easier. Neither of you wanted to see the truth." Samuel shifted uncomfortably. "Mom, about the police report. Was a mistake that could have destroyed what little relationship we had left," I finished. "But we'll discuss that later. Right now, I'm more interested in what you plan to do about your current situation." The couple exchanged glances. It was Monica who spoke first. "We can't afford the house payments without the estate money. Our lawyer says we need to either pay the full amount owed within 2 weeks or agree to a short sale." "And Samuel's business?" I asked. "Failing," Samuel admitted. 3 major clients have pulled their contracts because they heard about the financial irregularities. Word travels fast in business circles. I knew it did. In fact, I had made sure it traveled particularly fast in this case. A few well-placed conversations with the right people can destroy a reputation overnight, especially when that reputation was built more on assumption than actual achievement. "I see," I said. "And what would you like me to do about these problems?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Samuel and Monica looked at each other again, and I could see the argument they'd had in the car reflected in their faces. "We were hoping," Monica said carefully, "that you might consider helping us transition to a more sustainable situation." "Meaning?" "Meaning we can't continue living the way we have been," Samuel said, the words seeming to cost him physical pain. "We need to downsize, restructure everything. But we need some kind of bridge to make that transition possible." I studied my son's face. For the first time in years, I saw genuine humility there. The man who had once told me I wasn't welcome at his table was now asking for my help to keep his own table. "And why should I help you?" I asked. "Because we're family," Monica said quickly. "Are we?" I looked between them. "Because 2 weeks ago, I was told I wasn't welcome at your family dinner. I was replaced by a woman who, as it turns out, was using you for financial gain. So I'm a bit confused about when I became family again." Samuel winced, as if I had slapped him. "Mom, I know I hurt you. I know I made terrible decisions. But please don't punish Monica and the kids for my mistakes." "I'm not punishing anyone," I said firmly. "I'm simply no longer subsidizing the consequences of poor choices. There's a difference." I stood and walked to the window, looking out at the garden where I had found peace over the past few days. Behind me, I could hear Monica sniffling quietly. "However," I said, turning back to face them, "I'm not completely without compassion. I'll make you one offer, and it's not negotiable." They both leaned forward eagerly. "I will help you with a down payment on a smaller house, something you can actually afford on Samuel's real income, not his imagined inheritance. I will pay for the children's basic needs while you restructure your lives. But there are conditions." "What conditions?" Samuel asked. "What conditions?" Samuel asked. "First, you will both attend financial counseling to learn how to live within your means. Second, Samuel will find employment with someone else's company and learn what it means to work for a paycheck instead of expecting handouts. Third, every major decision regarding the children will be discussed with me before any other family member. And fourth, I paused, letting the weight of this last condition settle. You will both write letters of apology to me, acknowledging specifically what you did wrong and how you plan to do better. These letters will be read aloud at next year's Thanksgiving dinner, which will be held at my house, with me as the hostess. The silence that followed was deafening. I could see Samuel struggling with the idea of public accountability, of admitting his mistakes in front of his children and extended family. And if we refuse these conditions? Monica asked quietly. Then you'll face your problems without my help, I said simply. The choice is yours. Samuel looked at his wife, then at me, then at the floor. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. We accept. I smiled for the first time since they'd arrived. Excellent. I'll have James draw up the paperwork. As they prepared to leave, Samuel turned back to me. Mom, I have to ask, did you plan all of this? Did you know about Dorothy from the beginning? I considered the question carefully. Samuel, I raised you to be a good man. Your father left you the tools to be successful. Dorothy showed you her true character every day, but you chose not to see it. I didn't plan your downfall. I simply stopped preventing it. After they left, I poured myself a glass of wine and reflected on the conversation. My son was learning, finally, that respect isn't inherited, it's earned. And sometimes the most loving thing a mother can do is allow her child to face the consequences of their choices. The golden boy was gone, but perhaps, in time, a better man might take his place. But first he would have to prove he deserved the chance. 3 weeks later, I was in my garden when I heard shouting from the street. Looking up, I saw Samuel's car in my driveway and voices carrying clearly in the crisp morning air. I can't do this anymore, Samuel. I can't keep pretending this is going to work. Monica's voice was shrill with frustration. Monica, please just come inside. We can work this out with my mother. Your mother. Everything is about your mother now. Before it was about my mother. Now it's about yours. What about what I want? I set down my pruning shears and walked closer to hear better. Through the gap in my hedge, I could see them standing beside Samuel's car. Monica was holding a manila envelope, her face flushed with anger and tears. What about the kids? Samuel was saying. What about our marriage vows? We're supposed to work through problems together. Like you worked through your problems with your mother? Monica shot back. Like how you threw away our financial security because you couldn't be bothered to maintain a relationship with the woman who controlled our money? It was a fair point, though hearing it from Monica gave me a bitter satisfaction. The woman who had stood silently by while her husband dismissed me was now experiencing the consequences of his poor judgment firsthand. Monica, if you'll just give me time to rebuild. With what money? Your business is failing. We're living in a rental house that's half the size of our old home, and now your mother controls every aspect of our lives. I have to ask permission to buy groceries, Samuel. Permission? Do you know how humiliating that is? I smiled slightly. The financial oversight I had insisted upon was clearly working exactly as intended. Samuel caught sight of me through the hedge, and his shoulders sagged in defeat. Mom, he called out. Could we talk? I walked around to my front yard, noting how Monica immediately stepped back as if I might physically attack her. The woman who had once treated me like an inconvenience now looked at me like I was something dangerous. Good morning, I said pleasantly. I couldn't help but overhear. Is everything all right? Monica held up the envelope with shaking hands. Everything is not all right. I'm filing for divorce. The words hung in the morning air like a death sentence. Samuel's face went white, and I found myself studying his reaction with clinical interest. Was this fear for his marriage, or fear for what a divorce would mean to his already precarious situation. "Monica," Samuel said desperately, "you don't mean that. We've been through worse." "Have we?" She turned to face him fully, and I saw a strength in her that I hadn't known existed. "When, Samuel? When have we been through anything worse than losing our home, our financial security, and our dignity all at once? When your mother—" "Don't you dare blame this on my mother." Monica's voice rose to near shouting. "My mother didn't make you treat yours like garbage. My mother didn't make you think you were entitled to money you hadn't earned. My mother didn't destroy our lives, you did." It was satisfying to hear someone else hold Samuel accountable for his choices, though I noticed he still wasn't taking full responsibility. "If you two would like to come inside," I offered, "we could discuss this more privately." "No," Monica said firmly. "I'm done with family meetings. I'm done with conditions and oversight and having to justify every expense to my mother-in-law. I'm done pretending this marriage can survive what Samuel has done to us." She thrust the divorce papers towards Samuel, who refused to take them. They fluttered to the ground like wounded birds. "Monica, please. The kids need both their parents." "The kids need stability," Monica corrected. "They need a parent who makes good decisions and puts their welfare first. Right now, that's not you." I watched this exchange with the detached interest of someone observing a laboratory experiment. Every argument, every accusation, every tear was a direct result of choices Samuel had made over years of taking his family's love for granted. "Mrs. Whitfield," Monica said, turning to me suddenly, "I want you to know that I understand now. I understand why you did what you did. Samuel never respected you, never valued your place in his life, and I was too weak to stand up for what was right. The apology was unexpected and, honestly, too little too late. But I appreciated the acknowledgement." "Thank you, Monica. That means more than you might know." "But I can't live like this," she continued. "I can't raise my children in a household where every decision has to be approved by someone else, where their father is essentially a dependent rather than a provider." Samuel looked between his wife and his mother, and I could see him calculating, trying to find some combination of words that would solve this crisis, like he had solved problems in his business. "What if we modified the arrangements?" he asked desperately. "What if Mom gave us more autonomy?" "Samuel," I said quietly, "stop." He looked at me with surprise. "Stop trying to negotiate your way out of this," I continued. "Monica is telling you that your marriage is over. The least you can do is listen to her reasons instead of trying to find ways around them." Monica shot me a grateful look. He still doesn't get it. Even now, he thinks this is just another problem to be solved rather than the consequence of years of selfish behavior. Samuel picked up the divorce papers from the ground, staring at them as if they were written in a foreign language. "Monica, I love you. I love our children. Doesn't that count for something?" "Love isn't enough when it comes without respect," Monica said, and I realized she had learned more from this experience than I had given her credit for. "You say you love me, but you didn't love me enough to maintain a relationship with the woman who could secure our future. You say you love our children, but you didn't love them enough to think about their welfare before you gambled with their inheritance." It was a devastating assessment and completely accurate. "I can change," Samuel said, but even he seemed to realize how hollow the words sounded. "Maybe you can," Monica agreed. "But I don't want to spend the rest of my life finding out. I want to build a life based on reality, not promises." She turned to me one final time. "I'll make sure you have liberal visitation with the children. Despite everything, I know you love them, and they should know their grandmother." With that, she got into her own car and drove away, leaving Samuel standing in my driveway holding divorce papers and looking like a man who had lost everything, which in many ways he had. "Mom," he said finally, "what do I do now?" I looked at my son, really looked at him, and saw not the golden boy I had raised, Not the successful businessman he had pretended to be, but a middle-aged man who was finally facing the consequences of a lifetime of poor choices. Now, I said, you learn to rebuild from the ground up. You learn what it means to earn respect instead of expecting it. And you learn that some mistakes can't be fixed, they can only be survived. He nodded slowly, and for the first time in years, I saw genuine understanding in his eyes. It was too late to save his marriage, too late to reclaim his easy life, too late to undo the damage he had done to our relationship. But perhaps it wasn't too late for him to become the man he should have been all along. Time would tell. 2 months after Monica filed for divorce, I received an invitation that brought me more satisfaction than a dozen roses in bloom. Samuel's house, the house where I had been told I wasn't welcome, was being auctioned to pay outstanding debts. The irony was exquisite. I dressed carefully for the occasion, choosing a navy blue suit with my pearl necklace and matching earrings. If I was going to witness the public dismantling of my son's life, I was going to do it with dignity. The auction was held on a crisp Saturday morning in October. I arrived early and positioned myself with a clear view of the proceedings, watching as strangers wandered through what had once been Samuel's pride and joy. The house itself was beautiful, a colonial revival with pristine landscaping and high-end finishes throughout. Samuel and Monica had spared no expense when they bought it, confident that the estate money would continue flowing indefinitely. Now it stood as a monument to their overconfidence. I recognized several faces in the crowd. Neighbors who had attended Samuel's elaborate parties, business associates who had envied his apparent success, and a few vultures who specialized in distressed property sales. Everyone wanted to see how far the mighty had fallen. Samuel arrived 20 minutes before the auction began, looking haggard in a suit that was obviously expensive, but no longer fit him properly. He had lost weight over the past months, and the stress of his situation showed in every line of his face. He spotted me immediately and made his way over, his steps uncertain. "Mom," he said quietly, "I didn't expect to see you here. Where else would I be?" I asked. "This is my son's house being sold. I wouldn't miss such an important family event." He winced at the word family, and I knew my barb had hit its mark. "I suppose you're here to watch me fail," he said, bitterness creeping into his voice. "No, Samuel. I'm here to watch you learn." The auctioneer called for attention, and the bidding began. The opening price was set at 60% of the home's assessed value, a clear signal that this was a distress sale. Samuel stood frozen as strangers evaluated and dismissed his former life with casual indifference. "Lot includes all built-in appliances, light fixtures, and window treatments," the auctioneer announced. "Property to be sold as is, with immediate possession upon closing." I watched Samuel's face as the bidding progressed. Each new bid was another nail in the coffin of his old life, another step toward accepting reality. When the final gavel fell, the house sold for barely half of what he and Monica had paid for it. After the auction, Samuel found me in the parking lot. He looked defeated, older than his 42 years. "Satisfied?" he asked. "Educated," I corrected. "There's a difference." He shook his head. "I still don't understand how we got here. 2 years ago, I had everything: a successful business, a beautiful home, a family that respected me." "No," I said firmly. 2 years ago, you had the illusion of success built on other people's money, a home you couldn't actually afford, and a family that you took for granted. There's a difference." Samuel leaned against his car, suddenly looking exhausted. "Monica signed the final divorce papers yesterday." "I'm sorry," I said, and surprised myself by meaning it. "Are you? Because sometimes I think you planned all of this. Sometimes I think you wanted my marriage to fail." I considered his accusation carefully. Had I wanted his marriage to fail? Or had I simply wanted him to understand the consequences of his choices? "Samuel," I said finally, I didn't destroy your marriage. I simply stopped subsidizing the lifestyle that was destroying your character. Monica left because she couldn't respect the man you had become, not because I withdrew financial support. But if I had continued enabling your entitled behavior, you would have learned nothing. You would have continued taking everyone's love and loyalty for granted until there was nothing left to take. We stood in silence for several minutes, watching the new owners of his former house taking photographs and making plans. What happens now? Samuel asked. Now you do what millions of other people do every day, I said. You work for what you want instead of expecting it to be given to you. You build relationships based on mutual respect instead of financial dependence. You become the man your father hoped you would be instead of the boy you've been. Samuel nodded slowly. Will you help me? The question caught me off guard. After everything. The disrespect, the police report, the years of being treated like an inconvenience, he was asking for my help. That depends, I said. On what? On whether you're asking for help or asking for another handout. Because I'm done giving handouts, Samuel. I'm done solving problems you should solve yourself. He thought about that for a long moment. What if I asked for guidance instead of money? What if I asked you to teach me instead of rescue me? It was the first intelligent thing he had said in months. Then we might have something to discuss, I said. As I drove home from the auction, I found myself thinking about second chances and the difference between forgiveness and enabling. Samuel had lost his house, his marriage, and his illusions about himself. But perhaps, in losing everything he thought he wanted, he might finally have the chance to become everything he was capable of being. The boy who had once told me I wasn't welcome at his table was finally ready to learn what it meant to earn a seat at mine. Whether he would prove worthy of that opportunity remained to be seen. But for the first time in years, I was cautiously optimistic that my son might surprise me. 3 weeks after the auction, Samuel asked to meet me for lunch. He suggested a modest restaurant downtown, a far cry from the expensive establishments where he used to conduct business meetings. Everything about him had been scaled down. His clothes were department store instead of designer, his car was a practical sedan instead of a luxury SUV, and his manner was subdued rather than commanding. I arrived first and chose a table by the window where I could watch him approach. When he walked in, I barely recognized the man who had once carried himself with such arrogant confidence. This Samuel moved carefully, his shoulders curved inward as if protecting himself from further blows. Thank you for coming, he said as he sat down, and I noticed he waited for me to order first, a small courtesy he had never shown before. You said you had something important to discuss, I replied, studying his face. The past months had carved lines around his eyes and added gray to his hair. He looked his age for the first time in years. Samuel nodded, pulling a folded paper from his jacket pocket. I wrote something. You said I needed to write a letter of apology, and I finally understand what I need to apologize for. He handed me the paper with shaking hands. As I unfolded it, I could see that it had been written and rewritten multiple times, words crossed out, sentences added in the margins, entire paragraphs scratched through and started over. Dear Mom, it began, and I could see tear stains on the paper. I won't read the entire letter here, but I'll tell you the parts that mattered. For the first time in his adult life, Samuel took complete responsibility for his actions. He didn't blame Monica, didn't blame Dorothy, didn't blame circumstances or bad luck or misunderstandings. He wrote about the specific moments when he had chosen comfort over character. The times he had dismissed my opinions in favor of Dorothy's agreement, the way he had made me feel unwelcome in my own son's life, the casual cruelty of telling me I wasn't invited to family gatherings. But what struck me most was what he wrote about respect. I thought respect was something you earned once and kept forever. I didn't understand that respect is like trust. It has to be renewed every day through your actions. I stopped trying to earn your respect because I assumed I already had it. I stopped valuing your place in my life because I thought you would always be there regardless of how I treated you. When I finished reading, I folded the letter carefully and placed it on the table between us. Samuel watched my face anxiously, searching for some sign of forgiveness or approval. "It's a good letter," I said finally.
Honest.
"Complete. It shows real understanding of what went wrong." Relief flooded his features. "So you accept my apology?" "I accept that you're genuinely sorry," I said. "But acceptance of an apology and restoration of trust are two different things." His face fell. "What do you mean?" "I mean that understanding what you did wrong doesn't automatically undo the damage. Some things, once broken, can't be repaired. They can only be replaced with something different." Samuel stared at me as if I had spoken a foreign language. "So nothing I do will ever be enough? You're never going to forgive me?" "Oh, Samuel," I said gently, "I forgave you months ago. Forgiveness is something I do for myself, not for you. But forgiveness doesn't mean pretending the past didn't happen. It doesn't mean going back to the way things were." "Then what does it mean?" I took a sip of my coffee, choosing my words carefully. "It means I no longer carry anger toward you. It means I hope you'll become a better man. But it doesn't mean I trust you with my heart again. It doesn't mean I'll make myself vulnerable to being hurt by you again." The silence stretched between us as Samuel processed this distinction. "So, where does that leave us?" he asked finally. "That depends entirely on you," I said. "You can spend the rest of your life trying to reclaim what you lost, or you can accept that some consequences are permanent and focus on building something new." Samuel looked out the window for a long moment, watching people walk by on the street. When he turned back to me, there was something different in his eyes, a resignation that might have been the beginning of wisdom. "I keep thinking about Thanksgiving," he said, "about how confident I was that you would just accept being dismissed. I was so sure you would always be there, no matter how I treated you. And now I understand that love without respect is just dependency. I wasn't loving you. I was using you as a safety net while I performed for other people." It was perhaps the most insightful thing he had ever said to me. "What will you do now?" I asked. Samuel straightened his shoulders slightly, and for a moment I saw a glimpse of the man he might become. "I'm going to rebuild. Not back to what I had, but forward to something better. I got a job with Carter Construction, entry level, working my way up based on merit instead of connections." "That's a good start. And I'm going to learn to be a good father to my children, even if I can only see them on weekends. Monica says they're confused about why Daddy doesn't live with them anymore, and I want to be able to explain it in a way that teaches them something valuable." "What will you tell them?" "That Daddy made mistakes and is learning to do better. That actions have consequences, and sometimes those consequences are permanent. That love means treating people with respect, especially the people who love you most." I felt a flicker of something that might have been pride. Not for who Samuel was, but for who he was trying to become. "And what about us?" he asked. "What about our relationship?" I considered the question carefully. "I think we need to start over. Not as mother and son. That relationship is damaged beyond repair. But perhaps as two adults who share a history and want to build something better together." Samuel nodded slowly. "I'd like that. I'd like the chance to earn your respect again, even if it takes years." "It will take years," I said. "And it will require you to prove, through consistent actions, that you've truly changed. Words are easy, Samuel. Change behavior is hard." "I understand." As we prepared to leave the restaurant, Samuel hesitated. "Mom, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Do you think Dad would be disappointed in how this all turned out?" I thought about my late husband, about his final warnings regarding Samuel's character, about the safeguards he had built into his will. "I think your father would be disappointed that it took losing everything to teach you these lessons," I said. but I think he would be proud that you're finally ready to learn them." We parted ways in the parking lot, and I watched Samuel drive away in his modest car toward his modest apartment and his modest job. The golden boy was truly gone, but in his place was a man who might actually be worth knowing. Time would tell if Samuel could sustain this new humility, if he could build a life based on earned respect rather than inherited privilege. But for the first time in years, I had hoped that the son I raised might still be salvageable. The relationship we once had was dead and buried, but perhaps something better could grow from its ashes. 1 year after that lunch with Samuel, I hosted Thanksgiving dinner at my house. It was a small gathering, just myself, Samuel, and his children. Monica had remarried and was spending the holiday with her new husband's family, which was probably for the best. As I set the table with my finest china and silver, I reflected on how much had changed since that devastating Thanksgiving when I was told I wasn't welcome. The woman who had stood on her son's porch clutching a bottle of wine, and her dignity was gone, replaced by someone harder and wiser. Samuel arrived precisely on time, carrying a bottle of wine and looking nervous. His children, 8-year-old Emma and 10-year-old Jake, ran ahead of him into my house with the excitement of kids who rarely get to visit their grandmother's formal dining room. "Grandma Leia," Emma called out, wrapping her arms around my waist. "Daddy says you made your famous stuffing." "I did indeed," I said, smoothing her hair. "And your grandfather's favorite cranberry sauce." Jake, more reserved like his father, offered me a handmade card. "I drew you a picture," he said shyly. Inside was a crayon drawing of our family around a dinner table, with me clearly positioned at the head. At the bottom, in his careful 8-year-old handwriting, he had written, "Thank you for making Thanksgiving special again." Samuel watched this interaction with something that might have been relief. Over the past year, he had slowly been rebuilding his relationship with his children, learning to be present in their lives rather than simply providing for them. "Mom," he said, extending the wine toward me, "I brought Dad's favorite bottle. I've been saving it." It was a peace offering, an acknowledgement of everything that had passed between us. I accepted it gracefully. "Your father would appreciate that," I said. During dinner, I watched Samuel interact with his children and saw the man he was becoming. He listened when they spoke, asked thoughtful questions about their lives, and treated them with the respect he had never shown me. It was progress. When the meal was finished and the children were playing in the living room, Samuel and I sat at the table with coffee and the wine he had brought. "I have something for you," he said, pulling out an envelope. Inside was a check, not for a large amount, but made out to me with a memo line that read, "First installment, inheritance repayment." I looked at him with surprise. "Samuel, this isn't necessary." "Yes, it is," he said firmly. "I spent 2 years living off money I hadn't earned, making decisions based on wealth that wasn't mine. I need to pay that back, even if it takes me the rest of my life." I studied the check, noting the careful handwriting and the bank name, a small local branch, not the prestigious institution where he used to do business. "You can't afford this," I said. "I can't afford not to do this," he corrected. "I need to know that everything I have going forward is something I've earned myself." It was a gesture that told me more about his transformation than a dozen apology letters could have. The man who had once felt entitled to everything was now determined to earn back what he had taken for granted. "All right," I said, folding the check. "I'll accept this on one condition." "What condition?" "That you understand this doesn't change anything between us. You're not buying back my trust or purchasing your way back into my good graces. You're simply taking responsibility for your debts." Samuel nodded. "I understand. Trust has to be earned through actions, not payments." We sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to his children's laughter from the other room. Finally, Samuel spoke again. "Monica asked me to tell you something," he said. She wanted you to know that she's grateful for what you did. She said forcing us to face reality saved her from spending years in a marriage with a man who didn't respect her. Monica is a wise woman, I said. She deserves better than what you were giving her. She does, Samuel agreed. I hope someday I can be the kind of man who deserves that level of loyalty. As the evening wound down and Samuel prepared to take his children home, he paused at my front door. Mom, he said, I know things can never go back to the way they were before, but I hope someday we can build something better than what we had. I looked at this man who had once been my golden boy, who had once broken my heart with his casual cruelty, who is now slowly learning what it meant to be worthy of love. Samuel, I said, I think we already have. After they left, I sat alone in my dining room, surrounded by the remnants of our small Thanksgiving celebration. The empty chairs no longer felt like symbols of loss. They felt like possibilities. Space for the relationships that might grow, the trust that might be rebuilt, the family that might emerge from the ashes of what we had destroyed. In my purse was Samuel's check, a tangible symbol of his commitment to change. In my heart was something I hadn't felt in years: hope for my son's future. The matriarch's throne had never been about commanding others. It had been about commanding respect. And respect, I had finally learned, was something that had to be earned by everyone, including mothers and sons. Some people would say I was too harsh, that I destroyed my son's life out of petty revenge. They would be wrong. I didn't destroy Samuel's life. I revealed its true foundation. I didn't take away his family. I showed him what it cost to take family for granted. And in the end, perhaps the greatest gift I gave my son was the chance to become a man worth respecting. The golden boy was gone forever, but the man who remained might actually be worth knowing. As I cleaned up the dishes and prepared for bed, I felt a peace I hadn't known in years. The war was over. Not because anyone had won or lost, but because we had all finally learned what we were really fighting for: respect,
Dignity.
the right to be valued by the people who claimed to love you. I had reclaimed mine, and Samuel was learning to earn his. It was enough. Have you ever been treated like you don't matter by the people who should value you most? Have you ever been told that your feelings don't count, that your presence isn't wanted, that someone else is more special than you are? I want you to know that you have the power to change that dynamic. You don't have to accept disrespect, even from family members. You don't have to keep giving your love and support to people who take it for granted. Our book, Reclaiming Your Peace After Pain, contains the strategies and insights you need to rebuild your life on your terms. It's filled with real stories from women who refused to accept less than they deserved, who found the strength to demand respect, and who discovered that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable someone else's bad behavior. Don't let anyone convince you that setting boundaries is selfish or that demanding respect is unreasonable. You deserve to be valued. You deserve to be heard. You deserve to take up space in your own life. Click the link in the description to order your copy today. Your story isn't over. It's just waiting for you to start writing the chapters where you're the heroine instead of the victim. Remember, respect isn't something you beg for. It's something you command through your actions and choices. Thank you for watching. If this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Your support helps us continue sharing these powerful stories of transformation and triumph. Until next time, remember, you are stronger than you know, and you deserve better than you've been accepting.